They called it the Bloody Pit, a tunnel so deadly that even its engineers would not enter, and its walls still echo the names of the vanished. In the 19th century, Massachusetts gambled everything to carve a 5-mile passage under Hoosac Mountain, believing it would take just 3 years and $2 million to beat New York in the race for Western trade. Instead, it devoured 24 years, $21 million, and nearly 200 lives, unleashing a tide of nitroglycerin explosions, failed machines, and rumors of a mountain that wanted men dead. What kind of ambition drives people to keep digging into a hole that only seems to lead deeper into hell? The answer starts at the foot of Hoosac Mountain, with a promise that would cost more than anyone dared to imagine. In the middle of the 19th century, Boston's future ran straight into the granite wall of the Berkshires. As New York's Erie Canal funneled the riches of the Midwest to Manhattan's docks, Massachusetts watched its own trade slip away, carloads at a time. The numbers told a story of panic. Every year, more wheat, wool, and machinery bypassed Boston entirely. Railroads could not climb the steep grades of the Berkshires without exhausting their engines and risking disaster. 20 miles of sharp incline forced every train to crawl, while New York's smooth canal and rail lines ran flat and fast. State legislators pored over freight statistics and saw Boston's market share shrinking. They argued that without a direct route west, the city would become a backwater. The answer, they insisted, was not to go over the mountain, but through it, a tunnel nearly 5 miles long from the village of Florida to North Adams. At 4.75 miles, it would be the longest tunnel in the Western Hemisphere, a project to rival anything in Europe. The promise was bold and almost reckless. Politicians claimed the rock was soft, the route was simple, and the work would be done in 3 years for just $2 million. Newspapers printed boasts that Boston would soon reclaim the commerce lost to New York. The Troy and Greenfield Railroad received a state charter in 1848, with paper mill owner Alva Crocker leading the charge. Crocker and his allies saw the tunnel as a lifeline, a way to pull Boston back into the race for Western trade. But the numbers were only part of the story. Behind every projection was a wager that men and machines could outmatch a mountain. The economic pressure was relentless, driving the state to approve loans, advance credit, and mortgage the future for a hole in the dark. At the heart of it all stood Hoosac Mountain, a barrier of solid mica schist, waiting to test every promise made in the halls of Boston. The men who arrived at the foot of Hoosac Mountain carried more than shovels and drills. They carried the weight of Boston's expectations. But the mountain had its own plans. The first blows of the pick met not soft earth but mica schist, a rock so dense and layered it rang like iron under the hammer. Early surveyors, eager to please their sponsors, had called it manageable. In reality, it was a mineral fortress, forged by pressure and time, streaked with quartz veins that dulled steel in a single shift. Each swing sent up a metallic echo that faded into the dripping dark, a reminder that this was no ordinary hillside. The politicians in Boston, safe behind their ledgers, had promised that the rock would yield quickly. They had never stood in a shaft where the air pressed in and the walls wept icy water. They had never watched a drill bit snap or seen a charge of powder leave barely a scar. The mountain's skin was thick, its bones unyielding. Every foot gained was a battle. The mica schist split in ragged shards, sending slivers into hands and faces. The dust filled lungs and settled in the creases of the men's clothes, grinding into their skin until it sparkled with flecks of gray. The foreman kept the pace with curses and threats, but the rock did not care. It broke tools, shattered hopes, and sent men back to camp with bloodied knuckles and nothing to show. The engineers tried to chart a straight line, but their instruments trembled on uneven ground. Water seeped from invisible cracks, pooling in boots, and eating at the foundations of scaffolds. The deeper the crews dug, the more the mountain seemed to close in around them. Promises of quick victory faded with each stubborn inch. The mica schist did not just slow the work, it mocked it. The mountain stood silent, patient, and undefeated. By the end of the first season, the men understood this was not a job, but a siege, and the mountain was winning. A new kind of hope arrived at the East Portal in 1852, loaded onto a flat car and surrounded by engineers in top hats and waistcoats. The Great Wilson machine, all 70 tons of cast iron, was meant to chew through Hoosac Mountain like a clockwork beast. It stood 2 stories tall, bristling with cutting teeth and gears, a marvel of Victorian ambition. Newspapers called it the future of tunneling. The men called it the monster. On its first day, the monster roared to life. Steam hissed, gears clanked, and the cutting head pressed into the face of mica schist. For a moment, it looked as if the machine might actually win. But the mountain had other plans. The rock didn't crumble. It fought back, jamming the cutters and splintering the teeth. After just 10 feet, the Wilson machine seized up with a groan. Shafts bent, gears cracked, and the drive wheels spun uselessly against the stone. The engineers tried everything: more steam, new cutters, desperate prayers, but the mountain would not yield. The machine choked on the very rock it was built to conquer. By the end of the week, the monster sat silent and broken at the tunnel mouth, a monument to overconfidence. Its carcass rusted in the rain, visible to every crew arriving for their shift. The mountain seemed to grin, daring the engineers to try again. The politicians who had promised quick victory fell silent. The investors in Boston, who had bet on mechanical salvation, now faced the reality of a project stalled at the very edge of the darkness. With the monster dead, the work fell back to the hands of men. Crews returned to the old ways: hand drills, hammers, and black powder. Progress slowed to a crawl, barely 1 foot a day. Each morning, workers passed the rusting hulk, a daily reminder that muscle, not machinery, would pay the price. The engineers who had once boasted about conquering the mountain now kept their heads down, embarrassed by their failure. The laborers, mostly Irish and Cornish, grew weary and resentful, their faith in technology replaced by a grim acceptance of endless toil. The Wilson machine remained at the entrance for years, its iron bones picked over by scavengers and its name whispered with a mix of scorn and awe. It was proof that the mountain could not be bullied or tricked. The tunnel would not be won by clever inventions or grand designs. It would be carved out of darkness, inch by inch, with sweat and blood. Every plan for progress now carried the shadow of the monster, and every foot gained was a reminder of just how easily hope could rust away in the rain. Nitroglycerin arrived at Hoosac not with a bang, but with a whisper of dread. In 1866, Thomas Doane, the new chief engineer, faced a mountain that refused to budge. Black powder had proved useless against mica schist. So Doane brought in George Mowbray, a chemist from New York, who set up a makeshift laboratory in the woods outside North Adams. On the edge of the work camp, he mixed batches of nitroglycerin, an oily yellow liquid that could explode if it was shaken, dropped, or chilled below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. In winter, the nitroglycerin froze solid, turning glassy and even more unstable. Men learned to thaw it in buckets of warm water, their hands shaking as they watched for the first sign of crystal formation. Liquid death was carried each morning. Ceramic jugs bearing Mowbray's name were cradled in the carrier's arms, sloshing with a menace you could feel. The tunnel floor was slick with water, the air thick with dust, and the metallic taste of fear. No one spoke above a whisper. Some men pressed scapulars to their chests, others muttered old Cornish prayers. If a flask slipped, there would be nothing left but a red mist and a ringing in the ears. The only rule was simple and absolute: never look a carrier in the eye, never jostle his arm, and never ever run. The first blasts shook the mountain. Nitroglycerin was 13 times more powerful than gunpowder. When the charges went off, the concussion cracked the air so hard that workers' ears bled. The walls trembled and the tunnel filled with a choking haze. But the rock finally gave way. Progress jumped from 1 foot per day to 5 feet per day. For the first time, the mountain seemed to flinch. With the new power came new terrors. The nitroglycerin did not just kill by accident, it haunted the mind. Men swore they saw blue lights flickering in the darkness, or heard voices echoing from the cracks. Some blamed the Mohawk spirits, others said it was the mountain laughing. Tools disappeared and reappeared in impossible places. A spade left by the heading might be found hours later, half buried in the mud, 100 yards away. The foreman dismissed these stories as nerves, but the men knew better. Each shift another rumor spread. A carrier had vanished, a drill had split in two, a shadow moved where there should be none. Pneumatic innovation arrived soon after, powered by compressed air forced through iron pipes. The burly drill hammered steel into the rock with a speed that seemed almost inhuman. The noise was deafening, a constant metallic rattle that bounced off the stone and set teeth on edge. The drills made the air thick with fine dust, coating every surface and every lung. But they worked. With nitroglycerin and compressed air, the tunnel advanced faster than ever. The days of hand drilling were over, but the danger only began to change shape. The mountain was finally yielding, but at a price that could not be measured in dollars or feet. With progress came a new kind of risk, so great that the engineers decided they needed a shortcut. The plan was simple: dig a vertical shaft straight down from the top of the mountain and let crews attack the rock from the center as well as both ends. No one could have guessed what would happen next. October 19th, 1867. The morning began like any other. Steam rose from the hoist house, laborers took their places, drills rang against the stone. At the mouth of the central shaft, a single candle flickered near the naphtha tanks, its flame barely visible in the haze. No one noticed the thin sheen of vapor seeping through the boards. In a moment, the air itself caught fire. Flames leapt from the hoist house, swallowing the wooden frame and licking at the thick iron cable that held the elevator bucket suspended over the shaft. The cable glowed, then snapped. A ton of steel and iron plummeted 1,000 feet, vanishing into the black. The men below heard the shriek of metal and the roar of impact, then felt the shaft shudder as burning timbers and debris rained down after it. Smoke poured downward, turning the shaft into a chimney. The pumps that kept the water at bay sputtered and died as their lines burned away. In the darkness below, 13 men huddled together, the only light now the faint glow of embers drifting through the shaft. With no way up and the water rising, they tore planks from tool crates and lashed together a makeshift raft, hoping to find a pocket of air above the flood. Hours passed. The water climbed the walls, cold and relentless, stealing breath and hope in equal measure. There was no rescue, no ladder, no rope, no voice calling down. The shaft filled with silence, broken only by the drip of water and the creak of wood as the raft floated in the dark. A year later, when the pumps were finally restored and the water drained, the searchers found the raft still bobbing in the gloom, and the bodies of the 13 men together in death. The marks of their struggle remained, carved into the stone and wood. Above ground, the mountain stood unchanged. Below, the price had been paid in full. After that day, even the bravest men hesitated at the shaft's edge, listening to the water and wondering what else the mountain might demand. On November 27, 1873, two crews, separated by nearly 5 miles of mountain, broke through to each other in the dark heart of Hoosac. The numbers alone are hard to believe. After years of blasting, drilling, and measuring through fractured mica schist, the east and west headings met with a difference of just 9/16 of an inch. Not a foot, not a hand's width, a sliver barely wider than a thumb. In an age before lasers or digital levels, the feat depended on the steady hands and sharper nerves of surveyors who lived by the plumb line and the transit. Their instruments were battered by water and grit. Each day, teams set up their theodolites on slick stone, squinting through eyepieces as steam and dust clouded the tunnel. Above ground, surveyors took astronomical fixes, sighting Polaris on clear nights to anchor their bearings to true north. Below, they dropped plumb bobs down the central shaft, checking and rechecking the line as the headings crept forward. Every foot gained was logged in ledgers, every angle recalculated by candlelight. A single misstep, a moment's carelessness, and the two tunnels would have passed in the dark, missing each other forever. When the final wall of rock gave way, the men on both sides stood in disbelief. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then hands reached through the gap, and the silence broke into cheers that echoed from end to end. The tunnel was open. The surveyor's calculations, lines, numbers, hopes had survived the mountain's shifting bones. But the ledger recorded more than feet and inches. By the time the headings met, nearly 200 men had died, crushed, drowned, or blasted apart in the pursuit of a straight line. The official count stood at 195, but the true toll was likely higher. The tunnel was an engineering marvel, but its price was written in blood as much as in stone. Every day, freight still rumbles through the Hoosac Tunnel, proof that progress rarely buries its ghosts. The technologies born here drive infrastructure worldwide, yet the conditions that doomed so many persist in dangerous work sites today. Innovation without regard for life leaves a legacy written in names, not just numbers. The mountain remembers. What do we choose to remember? Share your thoughts below.